The cruelest wounds are not always made by enemies. Sometimes, they come from the hands that once promised to protect you. The desert had a way of swallowing screams. By the time the wind carried them across the red cliffs, they sounded less like cries for mercy and more like echoes from another lifetime. Most travelers learn not to follow such sounds. In this country, curiosity often earned a shallow grave beneath drifting sand. Ethan Walker knew that better than anyone. Yet when the desperate voice reached him for the third time, sharp enough to cut through the whistle of the canyon wind, his horse slowed on its own. "Help me." The words were strained, nearly broken, but unmistakably human. Ethan guided his bay gelding toward the ridge overlooking a narrow stone basin. Dust drifted lazily beneath the afternoon sun, painting everything in shades of copper and gold. The smell of heated rock mixed with dry sagebrush, while somewhere below, ravens circled with unsettling patience. Then he saw them. 6 Apache warriors formed a silent circle. Not a single weapon was raised. They did not need one. At the center, a young Apache woman struggled against their grip. 2 men held her arms. Another forced her knees into the dirt. One stood behind her with both hands pressing her shoulders downward as though trying to make her bow before the earth itself. She fought with every ounce of strength left inside her. Dark hair whipped wildly across her face. Dust clung to tears streaking down bronze skin already bruised by rough hands. "Please." Her voice cracked. "Listen to me." No one answered. The oldest warrior stepped forward slowly. His face showed neither anger nor satisfaction. Only the heavy expression of a man convinced he was carrying out a painful duty. Then Ethan heard the words that made his stomach tighten. "She is our sister." The younger men lowered their eyes. Not one of them looked proud. Not one hesitated either. The woman twisted hard enough to free one hand for a single heartbeat. Something flashed beneath the afternoon sun. A silver bracelet. Without warning, she tore it from her wrist and hurled it toward the ridge with the last strength she possessed. The small piece of silver spun through the hot air before striking a rock only a few feet from Ethan's boots. Every warrior turned. Every eye found the lone cowboy standing above them. Silence spread across the canyon. Even the wind seemed to disappear. Ethan bent slowly and picked up the bracelet. Its surface was scratched from years of wear, but one tiny engraving remained untouched. A soaring hawk enclosed inside a weathered circle. His fingers froze. He had seen that symbol before. Not in any Apache village. Not on any trading post. It had rested for years inside a cedar box beneath his mother's bed, wrapped carefully in faded blue cloth. She had never allowed anyone to touch it. Whenever he asked where it came from, she only smiled sadly and whispered, "Some debts are too sacred for children to understand." The woman looked directly into his eyes. She did not beg anymore. She simply watched him, as though placing the weight of her entire life into the stranger now holding that bracelet. One of her brothers finally spoke. His voice was calm enough to make the moment even colder. "Cowboy." He paused. "This is Apache justice." He took one deliberate step forward. "You walk away now, and you live." The canyon fell silent once more. Ethan lowered his eyes to the bracelet resting in his dusty palm. For reasons he could not explain, it no longer felt like silver. It felt like a promise someone had been waiting years for him to keep. Ethan closed his fingers around the silver bracelet. The metal was warm. Not from the desert sun, from the hand that had thrown it. He looked down into the canyon once more. 6 warriors stood perfectly still, waiting for his decision. Their faces carried no hatred, only certainty. It was the kind of certainty men wore when they believed tradition had already spoken louder than mercy. The eldest warrior lifted his chin. "You have no place here." His English was slow, deliberate, polished by years of dealing with traitors and soldiers. "This is between our blood." Ethan slid the bracelet into his coat pocket. "I've heard that before." The old warrior's expression did not change, and every man who ignored those words regretted it. A dry gust swept across the rocks, carrying the scent of dust and cedar smoke from the Apache camp hidden farther beyond the canyon. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed, unaware that only a few hundred yards away, a woman's fate balanced on the edge of silence. Ethan nudged his horse forward. Only one step. It was enough. Immediately, 4 warriors shifted their footing. Not threatening, not panicked, simply preparing. Years of ranch work had taught Ethan something valuable. Men ready for violence usually spoke loudly. Men who frightened him rarely needed to raise their voices. "I don't want trouble," Ethan said. "You already found it." The youngest brother answered this time. His jaw trembled despite the hardness in his eyes. Right away, before Ethan could reply, the woman finally spoke. "No." Her voice barely escaped her swollen lips. "Don't leave." One brother tightened his grip around her arm until she winced. Another looked away. Ethan noticed it. He noticed all of it. No one struck her. No one cursed her. No one smiled. Whatever this was, it wasn't cruelty born from hatred. It was something heavier. Something that hurt every person standing inside that circle. The eldest warrior slowly removed a ceremonial knife from his belt. Its blade reflected the dying afternoon light. He drove it into the ground beside his sister. Not as a threat, as a symbol. The judgment begins when the sun touches that ridge. He pointed toward the western cliffs. Before then, no outsider interferes. Ethan followed the direction of his hand. Less than 2 hours remained before sunset. The woman lowered her head, but her eyes searched desperately for Ethan. Not pleading, waiting, as though she believed he already carried the answer. He couldn't understand why. He had never seen her before today. Then she whispered something. So quietly the wind nearly stole it. "My mother." Ethan frowned. "What?" "My mother knew yours." Everything inside him went still. The canyon disappeared. The warriors. The wind. Even the ravens overhead. Only those 5 words remained. "My mother knew yours." The eldest brother immediately interrupted. "Enough." His voice cracked. Like splitting timber. "You've spoken enough lies." The woman closed her eyes. "I never lied." "No." One of the younger brothers stepped forward, pain breaking through his anger for the first time. "Then tell him why father died believing you betrayed us." Silence. She did not answer. Instead, tears rolled silently down her dust-covered cheeks. That silence was louder than any confession. The brothers mistook it for guilt. Ethan did not. People who lied usually searched for excuses. She searched only for the ground beneath her knees. Another breeze drifted through the canyon. The silver bracelet pressed heavily against Ethan's chest inside his coat. He remembered his mother's trembling hands. The locked cedar box. The same hawk carved into weathered silver. The same sorrow in her eyes every time she looked at it. She had once told him something else. Not when he was a boy. Much later. On the night before she died. "If anyone ever places that hawk back into your hands." She had paused for a long time. "Listen before you judge." At the time, he thought grief had made her speak in riddles. Standing in the canyon now, surrounded by strangers whose lives had somehow crossed his own decades before, those forgotten words no longer sounded like riddles. They sounded like instructions. Ethan slowly removed his rifle from the saddle. Every warrior stiffened. Without a word, he laid the weapon carefully across a nearby flat stone, far enough away that no one could mistake his intention. Then he unbuckled his revolver. He placed it beside the rifle. "I didn't come to fight." The canyon fell silent once again. Ethan stepped forward, unarmed, straight towards 6 Apache warriors and the woman they were preparing to condemn. The first person to move was not Ethan. It was the oldest brother. He walked forward until only a few feet separated them. Years had carved deep lines across his weathered face, yet his eyes remained sharp beneath streaks of gray hair braided with eagle feathers. He studied Ethan the way a hunter studies an unfamiliar trail, not with anger, but with caution. "You carry our sister's bracelet," he said quietly. "It doesn't belong to me." "No," Ethan replied, "but I think it once belonged to someone my mother knew." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the elder's face. Only for a heartbeat. Then it disappeared. "Your mother's ghosts are not welcome here." Behind him, Nayeli slowly lifted her head. "They're not ghosts." Her voice was hoarse. "They're promises." One of her younger brothers struck the ground with the butt of his spear. "Enough." His shout echoed against the canyon walls. "You've poisoned this family long enough." Nayeli lowered her eyes again. She did not argue. She did not defend herself. That silence bothered Ethan more than any accusation. People protecting lies usually fought desperately to be believed. She seemed exhausted from trying. The elder turned toward Ethan once more. "You want truth?" "I do." "Then hear ours." He pointed toward the valley below where scattered smoke drifted above dozens of Apache lodges. 3 winters ago, settlers attacked one of our hunting camps. His voice remained calm. Our children disappeared. Our women vanished. Our warriors found only blood. Another brother continued. We searched for months. Nothing. Then the youngest spoke, bitterness replacing grief. Until we found her. His finger pointed directly at Nayeli, riding beside white lawmen. The words settled over the canyon like dust after a landslide. Ethan looked toward Nayeli. She closed her eyes, still saying nothing. The eldest continued. Our father begged her to explain. She refused. Our people called her traitor. Father died before winter ended. He never forgave what he believed he had seen. The wind swept across the ridge once more. Ethan listened carefully. Every word sounded honest. Every face carried genuine pain. Yet something refused to fit. If she betrayed you, Ethan asked, why is she still alive? No one answered immediately. Finally, the eldest spoke. Because blood is blood. We hoped she would confess. We waited. We prayed. We gave her every chance. His voice broke ever so slightly. But silence became its own confession. Nayeli suddenly laughed. Not loudly. Not bitterly. Just one quiet, exhausted breath that sounded heartbreakingly empty. You think, she whispered. I stayed silent to protect myself. Her eyes finally met Ethan's again. No, I stayed silent. To protect all of you. Every warrior stiffened. The youngest brother shook his head violently. Another lie. If it was a lie, Ethan interrupted. Why hasn't she tried to run? No one had considered that. The canyon became strangely still. Ethan looked around the circle. 6 strong men. 1 bound woman. She had countless chances to disappear over the past 3 years if survival had been her only goal. Instead, she had remained, waiting, accepting every insult, every accusation, every whispered curse. Why? The question settled into every mind present. Even the brothers could no longer ignore it. Nayeli slowly looked toward the western sky. The sun had sunk lower. Orange light spilled across the canyon walls like burning copper. There isn't much time, she murmured. The eldest frowned. What does that mean? She looked toward the distant valley beyond the Apache camp, toward the narrow trail leading through Black Cedar Pass. They're coming. No one moved. They always come before sunset. The youngest brother laughed harshly. Who? Nayeli's answer was barely louder than the wind. The men you thought were your friends. A long silence followed. Then, very faintly, Ethan heard it. Not thunder. Not wind. Hoofbeats. Many of them. Still miles away, but growing closer with every passing second. The hoofbeats grew louder. Not hurried. Confident. Whoever rode toward Black Cedar Pass had no fear of being discovered. Every Apache warrior turned toward the distant trail. The youngest brother frowned. We have scouts. No one should be coming. Nayeli shut her eyes. They killed the scouts first. Her words landed like cold iron. The elder stared at her. What did you say? She drew a slow breath. I told you. They always come before sunset. No one spoke. Then a hawk burst from the trees below, climbing sharply into the fading sky. A moment later, another followed. The birds had been startled. Something large was moving beneath them. Ethan climbed onto a nearby boulder for a better view. The trail twisted between 2 sandstone cliffs nearly a mile away. Dust rolled above it in long brown clouds. At first he counted 6 riders. Then 10. Then more emerged behind them. They're spreading out, he murmured. They're trained. The elder joined him. His weathered eyes narrowed. They're not soldiers. No. They ride like men who don't want witnesses. One of the younger brothers suddenly reached for his bow. They're settlers. They're armed. Nayeli shook her head weakly. Worse. They wear settlers' clothes. But they're hunters. The youngest brother laughed bitterly. Now you're trying to frighten us. She looked at him with tired eyes. I've spent 3 years trying to save you. You spent 3 years betraying us. She looked away. I let you believe that. Ethan turned toward her. Why? She remained silent. The answer never came. Instead, the first rifle shot echoed across the canyon. It was distant, but unmistakable. A heartbeat later, another answered. Then another. The Apache warriors instinctively reached for their weapons. Smoke drifted upward beyond the western ridge. One scout's horse appeared first, without its rider. The terrified animal raced blindly across the hillside before disappearing into the trees. No one moved. Even the youngest brother stopped breathing. The elder whispered only one word. Tomas. That had been the scout's name. Another sound rolled across the valley. Not gunfire this time. Screams. Short, Abrupt. Then silence. Naeli lowered her head. They've reached the village. The youngest brother spun toward her. You knew? Yes. You knew all along. Yes. His face twisted with rage. You brought them here. Before anyone else could react, he lunged toward her. Ethan moved first. He caught the warrior's forearm before the blow landed. The impact nearly threw them both to the ground. The younger man struggled violently. Let me go. You don't know what she's done. I know enough, Ethan answered. No. You know almost nothing. The younger warrior finally stopped fighting. His shoulders trembled. Not from anger. From grief. My wife. He swallowed hard. My son. If she's lying. They're already dead. Those words silenced everyone. The elder slowly looked toward the smoke rising beyond the canyon. For the first time since Ethan had arrived, the certainty left his face. He turned back to Naeli. If you truly tried to warn us, why didn't you simply tell us the truth? Tears filled her eyes. They promised. Her voice nearly disappeared. That every child in this valley would die if I spoke before today. The wind carried the smell of burning pine. It wasn't close. Yet, Ethan looked toward the western sky. The sun had almost reached the ridge where the ceremonial knife still stood buried in the earth. The judgment was supposed to begin. Instead, the war had already arrived. Far below, another rifle cracked, this time much closer. Then came the sound that chilled every soul in the canyon. A child's scream. No one needed another explanation. The elder pulled the ceremonial knife from the ground. He looked at the blade for a long moment, then drove it back into its sheath. He faced Ethan. Finally, not as an outsider, not as a cowboy, but as another man standing between innocent lives and approaching darkness. Untie my sister, he said quietly, and may God forgive us, if she has been telling the truth all along. The ropes fell away from Naeli's wrists. She did not rub the raw skin. She did not thank her brothers. Instead, she walked straight toward Ethan. Her legs trembled from hours of restraint, yet every step carried the quiet determination of someone who had already accepted death long before today. She stopped beside him. Do you still have it? Without speaking, Ethan reached inside his coat and placed the silver bracelet into her open palm. She closed her fingers around it, as though holding someone's heartbeat. For a long moment, she simply stared. The polished silver had grown dull with age. The tiny hawk engraving was almost worn away. Yet she smiled. Not with happiness. With recognition. I thought I would never see it again. The eldest brother watched carefully. You know whose bracelet that is? Naeli nodded. I was 12 when my grandmother gave it to me. She looked toward Ethan. She said one day it would return to the family that had lost it. Ethan frowned. My mother kept another one. I know. Those two words made his pulse quicken. You know? Naeli's eyes drifted toward the crimson horizon. Your mother came here 20 years ago. The canyon seemed to grow smaller. Ethan had spent his entire life believing his mother had never traveled farther west than the nearest trading town. Now every memory he possessed began to shift beneath his feet. My mother was here. She nearly died here. Silence. Even the warriors forgot the approaching danger. Naeli continued softly. She was carrying medicine. A blizzard trapped her in the mountains. No settlers found her. No soldiers. Only my grandmother. Ethan remembered winter evenings beside the fireplace. His mother had often traced invisible circles across her wrist while staring into the flames. Whenever he asked what troubled her, she always changed the subject. My grandmother carried her for nearly 2 days. Naeli's voice broke for the first time. She stayed with our people until spring. The eldest brother slowly lowered his bow. He had never heard this story. Neither had anyone else. Before your mother left, Naeli continued, the two women exchanged bracelets. One remained here. One returned with her. They promised that if either family ever faced darkness, the bracelet would find its way home. Ethan felt his throat tighten. His mother's final words echoed inside his mind once again. Listen before you judge. They had never been random. They had been a message. One she knew he would someday need. The youngest brother looked between them in confusion. If this is true, why hide it? Naeli's smile disappeared. Because someone else learned about the promise. She turned toward the distant smoke rising over the valley. A man heard my grandmother telling the story. He wasn't Apache. He wasn't family. He was listening. The elder's face slowly hardened. Who? Naeli whispered the name. Silas Granger. Several warriors inhaled sharply. Even Ethan recognized it. Granger owned freight companies, cattle routes, and half the trading posts across 3 territories. People called him a respectable businessman. Others whispered another name. The Collector. He wanted the mountain pass, Naeli said. He wanted the silver beneath our land. My grandmother refused to help him. So he began taking children. The youngest brother stared. No. She nodded. He sold them east. He burned villages. He paid men to wear settlers' clothes. He paid others to blame neighboring tribes. Everything suddenly aligned. The missing children. The murdered scouts. The false betrayals. The silence she had carried for 3 endless years. You should have told us, one brother whispered. She looked at him with tears shining in her eyes. I tried. Every warning would have killed another child. So I became the traitor instead. No one answered. No one could. Far below, another column of smoke climbed into the evening sky. Then Ethan saw something glimmer through the trees. Not sunlight. Metal. Dozens of rifle barrels catching the last light of day. The riders were no longer hiding. They were advancing straight toward the Apache village. And at their front, a tall man in a black coat calmly removed his gloves. Silas Granger had finally arrived. Silas Granger did not ride like a man entering a battle. He rode like a man arriving to collect property he already believed belonged to him. 20 mounted men spread behind him in perfect formation. Their coats were dusty. Their rifles rested casually across their saddles. Several wore sheriff badges polished bright enough to fool anyone seeing them from a distance. Only their eyes betrayed them. Professional killers never looked at people. They looked at exits. At high ground. At who might still fight after the shooting stopped. Ethan had seen that look once before during the border wars. He never forgot it. They're not deputies, he said quietly. They're mercenaries. The elder nodded. And we invited them into our valley. Those words carried more shame than anger. Below them, smoke drifted through the pine trees where Apache families had lived in peace only hours earlier. Women hurried children toward the river while elderly men struggled to gather frightened horses. Chaos traveled faster than bullets. Silas raised one gloved hand. Every rider stopped at once. No shouting. No threats. Only silence. That frightened Ethan more than an army charging at full speed. Silas removed his hat. His silver hair caught the fading sunlight. Then he smiled. A small, courteous smile. Chief Aponi. His voice carried surprisingly well across the valley. I've come to finish our agreement. The elder's jaw tightened. There was never an agreement. Silas chuckled softly. There was. You simply didn't know your daughter signed it. Every eye turned toward Naeli. She stood perfectly still. I signed nothing. Oh. Silas slowly reached inside his saddlebag. He unfolded a weathered piece of paper. Even from the ridge, Ethan recognized the official seal burned into the corner. A territorial land deed. Silas held it high enough for everyone to see. 3 years ago, your daughter delivered this document to my office. The youngest brother staggered backward. No. Silas continued calmly. She accepted payment. She guaranteed safe passage. She promised your people would never interfere with my survey crews. His words struck like hammer blows. The brothers looked at Naeli once again. Old doubts returned with terrifying speed. Ethan watched her carefully. She wasn't looking at the paper. She was staring at Silas himself. Not with fear. With pity. Finally she spoke. You still carry that forgery. Silas laughed. Forgery. He waved the paper lazily. It bears your mark. It bears my blood. It bears your father's witness. The elder's face turned pale. My blood. Silas nodded. Your daughter signed. You witnessed. The contract became law. The canyon fell silent. Then Naeli slowly raised her wrist. The silver bracelet glimmered in the last light of day. My father never witnessed anything. Her voice remained calm. He was already dead. Those words froze the air itself. Silas smiled. Only this time. The smile faltered. Just slightly. Ethan noticed. So did the elder. My father died 4 days. Before you brought that paper. Naeli took another step forward. I counted every sunrise. I buried him myself. I placed his eagle feathers into the earth. She pointed directly at the document. So tell them, Silas. How did a dead man witness your contract? No one breathed. The mercenaries shifted uneasily in their saddles. One lowered his eyes. Another tightened his grip on the reins. Silas remained motionless. For the first time since arriving. He did not answer. The elder slowly reached toward Ethan. "May I see the bracelet?" Ethan placed it into his hand. The old chief turned it over once, twice. Then he suddenly gasped. Hidden beneath years of scratches, tiny markings appeared inside the silver band. Not decoration, not wear. Names. 2 names. One had nearly vanished with time. Sarah Walker. The other remained surprisingly clear. Ayanna. The elder closed his eyes. "My mother," he whispered, "was named Ayanna." When he looked back at Nayeli, the grief in his face had become something far heavier. Recognition. And somewhere beyond that, the first fragile beginning of truth. Across the valley, Silas quietly reached for the revolver resting at his hip. He realized exactly what everyone else had just discovered. His greatest weapon had never been his rifles. It had always been the lie. And for the first time in 3 long years, that lie had begun to die. Silas Granger's smile vanished. Only for a moment. But that moment was enough. Ethan saw 2 of the hired riders glance toward one another. Men who trusted lies never questioned them. Men who had just discovered they might be fighting for one usually did. Silas slipped the forged deed back into his saddlebag. "Interesting story," he said calmly. "A touching one. But stories don't change ownership." The elder chief stepped forward. "They change truth." Silas's eyes hardened. "Truth belongs to whoever survives." Without another word, he drew his revolver. The movement was smooth, practiced, instant, but he never fired. A sharp voice cut through the valley before his finger reached the trigger. "Don't." Everyone turned. One of Silas's own riders had dismounted. He was older than the others, with a gray beard and a faded cavalry coat that no longer fit his broad shoulders. His rifle remained slung across his back. He walked forward slowly. Each step seemed heavier than the last. Silas stared at him. "What are you doing, Cooper?" The man stopped halfway between both sides. "My name," his voice trembled, "is Benjamin Cooper." He swallowed hard. "And I'm tired." No one spoke. "I've buried enough children." Silas's expression darkened. "Get back on your horse." Cooper ignored him. Instead, he looked directly at Chief Apache. "I was there." The valley became perfectly still. "When your scouts disappeared, I was there." "When the hunting camp burned, I was there." The younger Apache warriors tightened their grips on their weapons. Not one of them interrupted. Cooper removed his hat. His weathered face carried more shame than fear. "We wore sheriff badges, so settlers would trust us. We wore blankets taken from Apache families, so tribes would blame one another." He closed his eyes. "The attacks were ordered by Silas Granger." Gasps spread through both groups. Silas laughed loudly. "A drunkard's fantasy." Cooper slowly reached into his coat. Every rifle rose. He withdrew not a weapon, but a small leather notebook. "I kept records. Every payment, every village, every child." He held the notebook toward Ethan. "I couldn't stop him, but I could remember." Silas's calm finally cracked. "Shoot him." No one moved. "I said shoot him." Still no one obeyed. Several mercenaries lowered their rifles instead. One after another. Metal touched dirt. Silas looked around in disbelief. "You fools. They're savages." Cooper shook his head. "No." His eyes filled with tears. "We were." He handed the notebook to Ethan. The pages were stained by years of dust and rain. Names filled every line. Dates, payments, routes. Besides several entries appeared one signature repeated again and again. Silas Granger. Another page contained something even worse. A list of children. Some crossed out. Some marked sold. Ethan felt his stomach turn. The youngest Apache brother stared silently over his shoulder. His lips began to tremble. Near the bottom, he recognized his own daughter's name. Beside it, one word. Delivered. The young warrior fell to his knees. Not because he had been wounded, because hope had finally been replaced by certainty. Silas suddenly spurred his horse backward. His voice rose into a scream. "They're lying. I built these towns. I gave this territory civilization." No one answered. The smoke drifting above the valley seemed to swallow his words before anyone else could. Chief Apache slowly walked toward Cooper. For one long heartbeat, Ethan wondered if the old chief would strike him. Instead, the chief placed a tired hand on the former soldier's shoulder. "You told the truth." Cooper nodded through tears. Too late. The old chief looked toward the burning village. "No." His voice was quiet. "It arrived before another child disappeared. Silas looked around one final time. His riders no longer stood beside him. Some had stepped away. Others stared at the ground. The army he had purchased with gold had collapsed. Not beneath bullets, but beneath a single honest confession. For the first time in many years, Silas Granger understood what real fear felt like. Silas Granger looked around for someone willing to save him. No one moved. 20 hired riders had entered the valley behind him. Now he stood alone. The silence was unbearable. He slowly laughed. A dry, hollow sound that echoed against the canyon walls. "So, you finally believe her?" Chief Apache answered without anger. "No, I finally stopped believing you." The old chief's words carried more weight than any rifle ever could. Silas's hand tightened around his revolver. "You think you've won?" His eyes swept across the valley below. Smoke still drifted above scattered lodges. Children still cried. Fear still lived here. "I already have your land. I already have your roads. I already have judges who sign whatever I place before them." He looked directly at Ethan. "And you? You're one cowboy. What exactly do you think you can change?" Ethan did not answer. Instead, he quietly opened Benjamin Cooper's weathered notebook. The pages fluttered beneath the evening breeze. Names, dates, payments, territories. Every crime carefully recorded. Every lie written in the same careful handwriting. He turned to the final page. Folded inside rested something none of them had noticed before. A small envelope, yellow with age, sealed with dark red wax. Benjamin frowned. "I never knew that was there." Ethan carefully broke the brittle seal. Inside lay a single letter. The handwriting was elegant, steady. It belonged to a woman. Nayeli stepped closer. Her breath caught. "My grandmother." Chief Apache's hands began to tremble. He recognized the writing too. Ethan read aloud. "If this letter is ever opened, then I have failed to stop the man called Silas Granger." Every soul in the valley became still. He believes gold makes truth. He believes fear keeps people silent. So I leave this record for whoever still has courage enough to read it. The letter described hidden burial sites, secret trading routes, children rescued before they could be sold. Every location matched the notebook. Then Ethan reached the final paragraph. His voice slowed. "If my granddaughter is ever called a traitor, know this. She carries every secret because I ordered her to. She must never speak. Not until the proof survives longer than I do." Chief Apache closed his eyes. The paper slipped from Ethan's fingers into the old chief's waiting hands. He stared at his mother's signature, then slowly turned toward Nayeli. For 3 long years, he had refused to hear her voice. 3 years of shame. 3 years of loneliness. 3 years carrying hatred she never deserved. His knees finally gave way. The proud Apache chief knelt before his daughter. Not because tradition required it, because his heart did. "I was wrong." Only 4 words. Yet they seemed heavier than the mountains surrounding them. The younger brothers followed. One by one, each lowered himself into the dust before the sister they had tied down only hours earlier. None of them spoke. No apology could erase what they had done. Nayeli looked at them quietly. Tears slipped down her face. Not tears of victory, only relief. She reached down and gently lifted her father to his feet. "We all lost enough." That was all she said. Nothing more. Chief Apache bowed his head. Across the valley, even several former mercenaries removed their hats. No one celebrated. Justice rarely sounded like cheering. It sounded like silence. Silas watched the entire scene unfold. His face had become pale. Everything he had built depended upon division, suspicion, hatred. He had spent years teaching good people to fear one another. Now those walls were collapsing before his eyes. Not because anyone fired a shot, but because one woman had endured 3 years of disgrace rather than betray innocent lives. Silas slowly backed his horse away. Very carefully, very quietly. Ethan noticed first. So did Nayeli. Their eyes met across the fading light. Neither spoke. Both understood the same thing. The truth had finally won. But the man who feared it most was about to run. Silas Granger pulled hard on the reins. His horse turned sharply toward Black Cedar Pass. He had escaped too many times to believe this day would be any different. But before he could ride 3 lengths, Benjamin Cooper stepped into the trail. He carried no rifle, no revolver, only the weathered notebook pressed tightly against his chest. Silas stared at him. "You'll die for this." Benjamin nodded slowly. "I know. I should have died years ago." Silas raised his revolver. The valley held its breath. One shot. That was all it would take. Instead, another sound echoed through the canyon. Boots. Dozens of them. Not soldiers. Not mercenaries. United States Marshals. They emerged from the northern ridge where no one had noticed them waiting. At their front rode an elderly marshal with silver hair and tired blue eyes. He raised a folded warrant. Silas Granger. His voice carried across the valley. We've been following you for 6 months. He looked toward Benjamin, and waiting for one honest witness. Benjamin quietly handed over the notebook. The marshal opened it. His eyes moved across only 2 pages before he closed it again. That's enough. He nodded to his deputies. The handcuffs clicked only seconds later. Silas did not resist. He simply stood frozen as iron closed around his wrists. The richest man in 3 territories suddenly looked very small. As they led him away, he stopped beside Nayeli. You could have lived comfortably. You chose suffering. Nayeli looked at him without hatred. I chose children. Silas lowered his eyes. For the first time, he had nothing left to say. Weeks passed. Smoke no longer rose above the Apache Valley. Instead, laughter slowly returned. Children played beside the river again. New lodges replaced those that had burned. Families once divided by suspicion now shared meals beneath the same evening sky. The younger brothers worked quietly every day. They never tried to erase the past, only to become better than it. Chief Apache carried the silver bracelet everywhere he went. One morning, before sunrise, he asked Ethan to walk with him to the old cedar tree overlooking the valley. Nayeli was already waiting there. The first light touched the mountains. Everything else remained silent. The old chief held out the bracelet. It belongs to both families. Ethan gently shook his head. It belongs here. Nayeli smiled softly. No. She reached for the hand of a little Apache girl standing beside her niece. Without ceremony, without speeches, she fastened the bracelet around the child's wrist. The silver looked oversized against such a tiny arm. Now, Nayeli whispered, it belongs to the future. No one argued. The wind carried the scent of cedar and fresh earth through the valley. A new beginning rarely arrived with applause. Sometimes, it arrived with a child wearing an old bracelet. Ethan saddled his horse before the village fully awakened. He had never liked long goodbyes. As he tightened the saddle strap, Chief Apache approached. I once judged a daughter without listening. He looked toward Ethan. You listened before judging. The old chief extended his hand. Ethan accepted it. Nothing more needed to be said. When he mounted his horse, Nayeli stood quietly beside the trail. You kept your mother's promise. She said it so gently that it almost disappeared into the morning breeze. Ethan smiled. I think. He glanced toward the little girl chasing butterflies with the silver bracelet shining on her wrist. Your grandmother kept it first. He tipped his hat one final time, then rode toward the rising sun. Behind him, the valley slowly disappeared beneath golden morning light. Ahead of him waited another dusty road. Another town. Another story no one had yet believed. Out here, people often remembered the man who drew his gun first. But history had a quieter way of keeping its books. It remembered the woman who carried the blame so others could live. It remembered the old chief who found the courage to kneel before his own daughter. It remembered the stranger who chose to listen before choosing a side. Because in the American West, justice was rarely born from the fastest hand. It was born the moment someone became brave enough to believe the truth before it was easy.